What keeps you awake at night?
Sea levels are rising globally.
Fears fueled by horror stories.
Among the worst flu season in a decade, and it hasn't peaked yet.
We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous.
Another series of deadly terror attacks.
I don't want to be blamed if you cannot get to sleep tonight.
All right. Wonderful. Welcome back, you guys.
Hello.
This is Things That Keep Me Up at Night. I'm Olivia.
I am Brooke.
I'm Bree.
Hey! She didn't cut out that time. She cuts out literally every time.
It's crazy.
Very excited. This is the last episode in our series for cover-ups and conspiracies. Very stoked.
It is.
And Brooke's leading it.
Leading the charge today, folks. And we didn't talk about it in the last episode, but we have decided to start doing bi-weekly uploads. Just for the sake of Olivia's sanity and our mental well-being, reaching bullshit every week. Yeah, it's a lot. It's tough. It's tough stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Plus, we're going back to school soon, and so compound mental well-being, constantly reading this shit, and
School.
wondering if we're gonna get jobs and pass our classes, and if we'll ever feel true happiness.
Hey.
It's the really rough stuff. Yes.
Let's not talk about that.
Fair enough.
All right, Brooke, you are leading the conversation today.
Do I have the floor?
Yes, you do. Go ahead.
Boy.
Go ahead. There's the floor.
So, the last time I got to share my nightmares with you, there was that little silver lining, because unlike you monsters, my story didn't involve kids at all, you might recall. So, this week, I cannot say that anymore, because my cover-up is 100% entirely about kids.
Oh, man.
Yay.
Oh, wait.
So, before we get into it, I want to say that I don't want to be unnecessarily graphic, but some of the stories that I'm going to be talking about could be potentially extremely triggering and super disturbing, because I think it's important to be really honest about the horrific things that these kids went through, because today we are going to be talking about the childhood sexual abuse scandal within the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew it.
So it's so funny because a week ago, while I was researching this, I took a look at our Things That Keep Me Up at Night Twitter, and I believe it was Olivia who commented on a Philip DeFranco post asking what he should talk about for that week. And she's like, you should talk about the childhood sexual abuse scandal in the Catholic Church. And I was like, well, motherfuck me in the ass. Because there was no way they were supposed to know that. And that was what was interesting, was that I had started research, I think, the week before that news broke. And then all of a sudden I went to pull up Google again, and it was all over the headlines that this grand jury report had broken. So we'll get to that for sure.
Yeah, so that report is the one where it's some kind of case had broke and they ruled on something and discovered 1,000 victims within a single parish or something like that.
Yeah. I'll give more detail onto that, but that's sort of what our main focus is going to be, because I will not lie to you. This is so pervasive. It's everywhere. It spans a century.
Oh, man.
It was so hard to put this into a narrative format, because not only is it all over the place, it's systematically being covered up today. The information that I found on this is, it's awful. The information on this is so limited because, only a couple countries have had real investigations. Australia, I think, is who's done the best, because they've done, a nationwide-esque thing. But, it's the Catholic Church. They're kind of a big swinging dick in the world, so they can kind of do what they want.
Wow.
Thanks, Bree.
What a comparison.
Oh boy, you know what? I probably could have rethought that metaphor. Anyway, so let's move on. I'm gonna try and condense pretty much a half a century into an hour or so, because that's kind of how long we have a timeline for. I'm pretty certain that we could go back further, but there's just no documentation. So we're gonna start kind of at like right around 1950. It's been going on for years and years and years. It's also been going on in pretty much every developed country with a strong Catholic following. The world at large knows about cases in Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Chile, the Dominican Republic, Guam, Honduras, India, Ireland, Norway, Poland, and, of course, the United States. And that is fucking alphabetized, bitches.
Us? United States?
Us?
Whew.
Doing
knew?
something wrong? The
No.
world's favorite nation? Never.
That's gotta be somebody
The world's
else.
number one nation.
That's a joke.
Travel magazine rated the United States the number one country in the world.
Just number one place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just number one place. For the
USA.
sake
USA.
Wow, I hate myself. For the sake of my own sanity, I'm just gonna focus on mostly the United States, because honestly that's enough. And
Yeah.
like pretty much anything I can tell you about what happened in the US can be applied to what happened everywhere else, because we're talking about raping kids. So, you know, you can only really go into so much detail. Most of the accusations, if we're to believe the word of the Catholic Church, most of the accusations happen in the U.S. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that those are the ones we know about.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that would be, and I can't really speculate. But yeah, I'll go ahead and say that it's probably just as pervasive in other countries as it is here.
Well,
But
yeah,
enough
because I was
about-
gonna say, in what's the movie that got the Oscars? The
Spotlight.
Spotlight, right?
Yeah.
Like the big issue that they had there was Boston is a Catholic city, so
Oh,
like
absolutely.
breaking anything there is like literally spitting in the face of Boston.
Yeah.
Even then, we're a Christian country. We're not a Catholic country. But if
Sure,
you go
yeah.
somewhere like Spain and
Sure,
start
yeah.
making some allegations, yeah, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that would not go over well.
Definitely wouldn't fly. And there are certain countries where, like, Catholicism is just tied into the government, and, like,
Yeah.
you know. But enough depressing speculation. Let's get to the depressing facts. The first recorded internal understanding of sexual abuse of minors by priests within the Catholic Church in the U.S. Seemed to be in the late 1940s, which, yay, long time ago. An American Roman Catholic priest named, I swear to God, Gerald Fitzgerald.
You're joking my ass.
I had to go back and read it 4 times because I didn't believe it.
Why would
Gerald
a
Fitzgerald.
parent do that?
They're like, hey, Margaret, I really want to set up our son for failure here. I know that our last name is Fitzgerald and that you've taken it on because you're a woman and I'm a man and that's what we do. But let's just go ahead and say fuck it. Let's make our child's life a living hell. Let's throw in a Gerald. It's a fuck.
2 Geralds are better than 1.
Absolutely.
Man.
But like we can't give Gerald Fitzgerald too much flack, because he founded what is known as the Congregation of the Servants of the Paraclete, which is basically a center that tried to treat Roman Catholic priests who were struggling with substance abuse and sexual misconduct, etc., etc. That I think was intended to be a better thing than it ended up being, because when it started, you know, he and the people who worked there were treating priests for vices, and I think that they actually wanted to help people. Over time, more centers were opened across the country that were similar, but the intention very quickly shifted into displacing blame and basically rewriting history and calling what amounted to sexual assault into something much lesser, you know? Like, they would start calling it inappropriate contact or something else. And that ended up being sort of the purpose of these centers.
I would absolutely call it inappropriate contact at the very fucking least.
Sure. Sure. But like,
definitely
you know,
not what it is.
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to prevent future pain. It was just sort of to save face. So they'd send these priests to these centers, and then they'd come back out and be quote-unquote healed. And nothing would have changed, of course. But when it began, Gerald Fitzgerald wrote a series of letters, the earliest of which dated back to the early 1950s, where he warned a whole bunch of high-ranking Catholic big shots that pedophilia within the church was not only a problem, it was wildly pervasive. He wrote, and I quote this, "Sexual abuse offenders were unlikely to change and should not be returned to ministry."
Thank God.
Yeah. Well, no one cared or listened. He spoke to the Pope at the time, Pope Paul VI, about the problem during his service, and really nothing changed for like 60 years.
Great.
Interestingly enough, the Vatican's position on the reports was virtually non-existent until about 2001. And that was when they finally ordered that sexual misconduct cases were to be reported to the Rome hierarchy. Before then, it was pretty much just standard practice to give the diocese, like the individual diocese, control over the entire situation. So, generally speaking, the offending priest would just be moved from one diocese to another, usually without warning the new diocese that the member had sexually assaulted a child. The leaders just didn't know, and that would happen over and over and over again, where if they did it in one place, they were just moved to another. If it happened again, they would be moved to another, and so on and so on. Yeah, very, very rarely a clergy member would be defrocked, which for all you non-Catholic listeners over there, hang on 1 second. The cat is just going to town on the bed. Hang on 1 second.
For all you Catholic listeners, give it a sec, because the
just
cat
give
is
it a
on
hot
the
second.
bed.
Yeah, we got a cat situation, so
Yeah, for all you non-Catholic listeners, a cat is a small feline that has been domesticated.
I know Catholics in particular don't know anything about cats, so
Catholics
please
are
don't write us
notoriously
letters.
dog people, and I think it's really offensive for you to.
Jesus Christ. Okay, as I was saying, to be defrocked just means that they lose their rights to act as an ordained member of the church. They can't really be a priest anymore. But again, I can't stress this enough. That was super rare. Generally speaking, priority numero uno for the church was just avoiding bad publicity at all costs. And usually what that meant was paying off people, moving their priests from one diocese to another, and just pretending it never happened. And it worked for a long time. And even after the Vatican made their mandates, a year-long investigation by the Dallas Morning News found that even after the 2002 public outcry, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, against Catholic sexual assault, the Vatican would just move offending clergy members out of the country that was accusing them and then place them into positions in other countries that continued putting them into close contact with children. So, and that was after they ruled that churches needed to report sexual misconduct to the Vatican.
Oh.
And the church, by the way, maintains to this day that that's false, but there's pretty damning evidence to the contrary.
Well, is it?
What do you mean?
Is it false?
No. It's pretty clearly absolutely the case that they would move these people to other countries and then just stick them wherever they fit. Yikes. And often that put them into close contact with kids. In any case, they found that over half of the 200 cases that they investigated involved clergy members attempting to evade law enforcement. And that's a pretty bad stat. I think it's super interesting and pertinent to note that there's this thing in the Catholic Church called the Sacrament of Penance, where anything disclosed during a formal confession to a priest would be considered confidential and therefore not reported to law enforcement under any circumstances. That's known as the seal of confessional. And that's taken pretty dang seriously in the Catholic Church. That's so much so that in Australia, during their whole legal proceedings, all of the serving archbishops told the Royal Commission to Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse, that is a fucking mouthful, that they would never report a member of their church if they confessed to raping a child, and I quote, to raping a child during their confessional. And that's complicated, I think. obviously, like, we can take a minute to break this down, but my gut reaction when I hear that is to think that that's a little bit bullshit.
Right.
Right? So I figure if you're a high-ranking church official and you hear a member of your clergy say, I raped a kid, you have the choice between upholding ancient tradition and potentially protecting an innocent child, most likely many. You always protect the child. Like, that's just a no-brainer to me.
Well, and also you got to think about it this way, right? Because 90% of 90% of rapists / people who commit sexual assault are repeat offenders.
Yep,
right?
repeat offenders. Yes, and that's I was gonna get into that a little bit. That like. 9 times out of 10, it's gonna happen again. Has happened multiple times, and that's gonna become evident as I go into the specifics of some of these cases. And I started to think about, like, there's a similar rule in therapy where, like,
right.
if I went to my therapist and said I murdered someone in a session, my therapist can't report me because that's breaking confidentiality. Yeah. However, if I admit to planning to kill someone, they are required by law to report me because their report would prevent further harm.
Right.
Well,
So-
I think if you're a mandated reporter, I think you have to, if there's criminal acts that have been committed in the past, you have to report to. But I'm not quite sure. I think it's if there was any illegal activity or planning on any future illegal activity, harm to the person participating in therapy or other people, then that's when they have to report. But like that being said, I think that's a great system because it's protecting other people and the individual as themselves. Everything else, like, right, it's a confidentiality system. And I understand, like, that with Catholicism especially, like, there's a tradition to uphold. It's such an old religion that, like, they want to stick to the roots of it, which is fine, and that's fair. In traditional practices should be upheld in religion, like, at some points. But when something morally is happening that's wrong, such as raping a child, I feel like something should be done about it. Just right, and my 2 cents.
That's sort of where I stand with all this, is that when something is this clearly broken, you fix it. Right. And, like, apologists and likely church officials would argue that the sacrament of penance is similar to the therapy thing. And, like, you know, after all, sexual abuse has already happened if it's being confessed. But like you said, my general understanding of pedophilia and sexual assault sort of shoots that down for me. So, like, when I say that when I say that murderers are less of a continuous threat than child molesters, I really, really, really mean it. Like, there's a lot of cases when murder, to my understanding, generally happens under impulse, and dare I say, can even be defensible in a lot of cases. And that sounds so awful, but, like, and it doesn't absolve responsibility for taking a life, but I can generally understand if you're killing someone in self-defense, etc., you know? And child molesters, on the other hand, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I'm sorry, but you gotta kill yourself. It's I don't make the rules. And they abuse positions of power and manipulate impressionable minds to their own end, even while knowing the damage they do. They scar the continuous lives of innocent people, innocent children, for the sake of sexual gratification, and then have been proven to do so again and again without constant and rigorous therapy, you know? Like, for me, that's kind of all I need to start changing the rules of the Catholic Church. At that point, fuck tradition, I'm sorry. But, like,
also,
kids are getting
if you're
hurt.
Gonna get into it, too, statistically, they've found that people that have been molested are more likely to become sex offenders.
Actually, I am.
Okay.
And I'll sort of shelve that for a hot second. But yes, I am gonna talk about that.
We'll get to that, ladies and gents.
That's a surprise tool that'll help us later. You know, at the end of the day, it's just a question of whether tradition is more important than the lives and well-being of kids. And y'all kind of know where I stand on that.
Right.
And personally, I think you're a monster if you disagree with me. But without going any further into my opinions and whether or not I'm right about everything, Let's get into the facts of Catholic child molestation in America. The fun stuff. So there's this website called bishopaccountability.org, which was not only super helpful, but very overwhelming to read because it is so extensive. And according to this website, there have been over 2,000 legal cases filed against the church in the United States alone.
Jesus Christ.
Over the course of 6 years, 9 other major settlements have been reached that don't include the one that I'm going to talk about later. And they involve 375 individual cases and 1,551 individual victims, with payouts totaling at just about $1.1 billion.
Jesus. Well, and
that
you
is
also,
6 years.
That's obviously a fucking frightening statistic, right? That's awful. That's horrible.
Yeah.
That's disgusting. But then you gotta also look at it further, right? With victims of sexual abuse, a lot of the times they're scared to report.
Oh, yeah.
So think about all the people who haven't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. And
Okay.
these are just the ones that they know about, that they have, like, active documentation that it happened.
Right.
Like, there are countless many more that
Right.
probably we'll just never hear about. And according to the Associated Press, total settlements from the 1950s to today easily reaches over $2 billion, while Bishop Accountability estimated closer to $3 billion. Really, that's a big number. I don't think people quite understand how much money that is.
Yeah, it's a lot of fucking money.
It's a lot of fucking money. And the accusations and payouts became so widespread that 5 dioceses sought out bankruptcy insurance, and 8 others actually went bankrupt in the U.S.
Wow.
There's a lot of money in the Catholic Church, I'm sure you know. That's
Yeah.
pretty insane.
Yeah.
Right.
They went straight bankrupt. Part of the problem, it seems, is just the complete internal reluctance to even talk about the issue. Until fairly recently, the standard operating procedure was just to send them to their rehab ministries and then try to forget it ever happened. And there was really no media attention either until, I think, the late 1960s, mostly because the church worked so damn hard to cover their own tracks. It was very much a system of take care of your own, make sure that they don't have bad press. And the first article that I could find to get national attention was published in 1983, like 30 years, over 30 years after we had our first indication that the church knew about it, by the National Catholic Reporter. That's almost a half century after the church became aware of the problem. The article is a half-page long and reports on one 57-year-old priest in Portland, Bree, who was accused.
Shout out.
Shout out to Portland.
Oh, fuck. Sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, he was accused of, and convicted actually, of a misdemeanor sex abuse charge after molesting an unnamed boy whose age was not disclosed beyond that he was under 18. Which is not a good sign.
Right.
I think he was young. The DA at the time said that there was evidence that indicated that the priest's behavior had likely been continuous for around 15 to 20 years. Would you like to guess for me how long he was in prison?
6
How long the
months.
sentence was?
6 months.
That's less actually. He received 1 year in prison.
Oh, that's, I guess, better than I thought.
It's because you guess so low. It's because you guess so
You just
low.
like
so
are
you're
so cynical, Olivia.
I don't know. I'm realistic.
I can't even have my moment, and you know, just
Well, because let's be
just give
honest.
me
Do we any of us really expect him to get more than a year?
Oh no,
No,
absolutely
come
not.
on,
I was
guys.
disappointed, but I wasn't surprised.
Right.
And that was, I think, that was the first instance where everybody knew that something awful had happened, and the world at large, or I guess the U.S. at large, was like, hey, what the fuck is happening? So the issue pretty much disappeared with a couple of exceptions, but it pretty much disappeared until about 2002, when the Boston Globe, you mentioned that Boston is a very, very Catholic city, but the Boston Globe decided to write what ended up being a Pulitzer Prize winning report on the sexual misconduct within the Catholic Church.
I got chills again.
Yeah, which was kind of a ballsy move, in my opinion.
Yes.
Because the public, especially the Boston public, just didn't want to hear it. But they wrote it anyway. And in a rough summary, it was a collection of stories from the victims and others who provided information on it. In an interview after the report had been fully published, staff members at the Globe estimated that they received several thousand phone calls, emails, and letters during the investigation, most of which were from victims themselves. And many of them reported instances of abuse that they had never reported before, hadn't even told their families or their spouses. They had just kept it secret for years and years. And they also, the staff members also spoke briefly about their experiences interviewing the victims, saying that by spending so many hours listening to these stories, thousands of stories, they were able to draw some pretty much inarguable conclusions about the effects of sexual abuse on children. It just became so clear from the similarities between the once kids, now adults' lives that, you know, it ruins you.
Yeah.
And the stories were just startlingly similar. This was also one of the first times that priests' names were published in Mass.
Ooh, wow.
Good.
Yeah, and normally the church tried to hide the names from the public, and the Boston Globe was really careful by saying that they had received a lot of names, but they only published names that they had, like, substantiated, evidence-based.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, they had to know for sure that what happened, and then they published it. So I think it ended up being over 100 names that they ended up publishing. Those were substantiated stories. So, really quick, before we talk about the big deal with the grand jury report that happened a month ago, I want to talk about something called the John Jay Report. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, but it was a 2004 volunteer-based study that was held to try and break down the demographics and stats of more than 10,000 allegations against more than 4,300 priests between 1950 and 2002. So there's a lot in there, obviously. The report was just expansive. And you're saying, oh no, it ended up being really informative. It was a good thing to have come out, but it's just staggering, you know? I'm just going to run right down the Wikipedia because I think that it says a lot about what we're dealing with here, and I think you guys can just bring on the reactions.
Yeah,
sure.
Because it's a lot. So, around 81% of the victims were male.
Okay.
Female victims of sexual abuse by Catholic priests tended to be younger than the males. The data analyzed by John Jay researchers showed that the number and proportion of sexual misconduct directed at girls under 8 years old was higher than directed at boys of the same age. Ugh. Yeah.
That is so gross.
It's kind of awful. 22.6% were of all victims were aged 10 or younger. 51%, this is the largest stat, were between the ages of 11 and 14. And 27% were between the ages of 15 to 17.
Mm. So more young than older, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
I was actually sickened by the 11 to 14 stat. 51% was between 11 and 14. What were you doing when you were 11?
Jesus. I was collecting geodes and getting made fun of in gym class for my asthma. Like that.
Yeah,
I collected geodes myself.
And listened to My Chemical Romance. And
Absolutely.
Swoopy hair.
Yeah.
You sure did. I remember that.
Man, that just destroys your childhood, dude.
That destroys your
right
life.
Then and there.
Yeah.
Because that's like the youngest ones, like, you know, you don't really have the reasoning skills available to you
Of
to like
course.
fully understand what's happening. 11 to 14 you definitely do. You know what I mean?
And it's really interesting, right? Because when you're that age, your whole thing is, you trust adults and you trust authority figures, especially if you're in a Catholic home or a religious home, just in general. Like, the people of the church are people that you should trust the most. Is what you're
demanded
taught.
that you trust them.
Right, and so that's just horrific in every way. And I think that's also an age where you should not be having sexual experiences whatsoever. Like,
I wouldn't even classify this as a sexual experience. This is just
absolutely
brutality.
not. It's just, no, absolutely. You're 100% right. But you know what I mean? Like, you shouldn't, that shouldn't even be.
It shouldn't be on your radar.
Right, ever. And so, like, the fact that you're going to have to go the rest of your life with that, God, it's just horrible. It's awful. It's disgusting.
Oh, man.
And we've got so much more. You got no bits. I think that's probably fine when we're talking about kids getting sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
And we've got so much more. Like, that I think was
I
the worst
worried.
stat.
I was like,
No. That's the worst of it, I think. But we've got so much. We've got so much more. So many more. Just from the John Jay report. Never mind everything else. So moving forward, a substantial number, meaning almost 2,000, very young children, and they don't give a stat as to age, but they just classify very young children were victimized by priests during the 1950s into 2002. 9,281 victim surveys had information about one investigation. In this investigation, in 6,696 cases, an investigation of the allegation was carried out. Of these, 4,570 were substantiated, 1,028 were unsubstantiated, 83 were found to be false, and in 56 cases, priests were reported to just straight up deny the allegations. So to break that down into percentages, 72% of all victims in this investigation, or I guess in this report, ever had an allegation that was carried to fruition. Of that 72%, 80% were substantiated. So 80% of the time that it was investigated at all, it was true, and it was found to be, it was inarguable that it was true. In 18%, they were unsubstantiated, which doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't true. They just didn't find the evidence. In 1.5%, they were found to be straight up false. And then 56% of that, almost 7,000, they just denied the allegations. But in all the others, they didn't.
Well, also, I think it's important to remember, too, that in any form of crime or report of a crime, it's usually around 1.5 to 2% are false, just in general.
yeah.
And I want to make that clear because whenever I talk to people about sexual assault allegations or, like, people bringing sexual assault to fruition, a lot of people say, how do you know if they're being honest? And you're like, they usually are.
Yes,
But, like, and that's such an insane argument because a woman, or I guess anyone, no one gains anything by claiming that they were assaulted. In the rare instance when it's like a super rich dude, they might come out of it with financial security, but that, like, never happens because, hey, they're rich, they can afford fucking lawyers. A woman or a man or somewhere in between, a child who claims that they were sexually assaulted gets to go through the fucking ringer for the rest of their life because the public doesn't believe them.
Right, absolutely.
Well, in
and
fairness,
also,
and like devil's advocate, there's been like a handful of stories, and this is adults.
Sure.
This is not the church. This is like adult woman.
Right.
Like I remember there was one maybe like 3 months ago-ish. I don't know. I don't really watch the news.
There's been a couple.
Yeah, it's like she deliberately lied because she was like upset with him and he went to prison, and then like through DNA evidence like 25 years later, it was like found to be false, right? And in that case, obviously she should be prosecuted for lying.
right, that's awful and disgusting.
Right. Statistically, again, 1.4%, right? So in the rare case where it's like mistried,
Right.
it's pretty rare.
And my whole thing is that, like, it's so rare for something like that, for a sexual abuse case to go to trial. It's so rare for someone to get convicted anyway. It's a fucking...
Yeah.
I almost said miracle, but, like, whatever the opposite of a miracle is, that this dude ever went to prison.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, 9 times out of 10, they don't go to prison. They get I don't know, probation or community fucking service. Yeah.
Right, and the mess that you have to go through the legal system, because like I got in this debate with someone actually a couple weeks ago about sexual assault and rape and how why people don't report. And like, I think what people don't necessarily understand is that if you do report, people who actually believe you and are going to be there to support you and go through the court system, all of that takes a lot of money and a lot of time. Huh?
Yeah, so much money.
Oh, yeah, and so, like, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time, it takes people believing you, which isn't necessarily a stigma that happens a lot, as well as just horrible, like, emotional stress and mental stress and, like, everything that you have to look at the person that sexually assaulted you every day and the possibility of them not actually going to fruition. It's a hard, horrible process. So I completely understand why people don't report.
I want anyone listening to take a good long look at themselves and ask if they would be willing to dedicate years of their life to trying to get the off chance that justice is served, or whether you would want it to just fucking go away. Because I think anyone who's being honest would prefer to just pretend it didn't happen. Like, it's human nature.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think dealing with it head on is extremely hard. And I think it's very, very hard. Also, the amount of financial stress that you have to go through with reporting.
Yeah.
It's just hard. And it's hard.
Yeah. So there's a couple more of these.
Go for it.
Boy.
Yeah, just more stats. More than 10% of the allegations were characterized as not substantiated simply because the diocese or order couldn't determine whether the alleged abuse actually took place. So what that boils down to is that they just didn't have the evidence. And I'll get into a little bit later that the churches individually, we know that they've destroyed evidence. And that was just a widespread thing in covering up their tracks. For approximately 20% of the allegations, the priests were either deceased or inactive at the time of the receipt of the allegation, so no investigation was conducted because there was nothing they could do, especially in the event that they were dead. So, in 38.4...
Dig them up and try them.
Come on. Oh, God, I wish it was funny. 38.4% of the allegations, the abuse is alleged to have occurred within a single year. In 21.8%, the alleged abuse lasted for more than a year but less than 2. In 28%, between 2 and 4 years. In 10.2%, between 5 and 9 years. And in under 1%, 10 or more years. So it did happen that there were people who were abused for more than 10 years.
Oh,
holy crap. Yeah. The 4,392 priests who were accused amount to approximately 4% of the 109,694 priests in active ministry during the time that this report was published. Of that 4,392, approximately 56% had one reported allegation against them, 27% had 2 to 3, 14% had 4 to 9 allegations, and 3% had 10 or more against them. And that 3% is comprised of 149 people, and those 149 priests were responsible for almost 3,000 victims, or 27% of all of the allegations.
God.
Yeah, that's a horrifying stat. And the allegations were substantiated for 1,872 of the priests and unsubstantiated for 824. They were thought to be credible for 1,671 priests and not credible for 345, which is a confusing stat because the line between substantiated and unsubstantiated is a little bit blurred there. And I think that can just be a testament to how messy this is. Because no one really knows the extent of all of it. Evidence was destroyed. And also, in a lot of cases, the allegations are years and years and years old, like decades old. it's pretty much impossible to do an effective study on a sexual abuse charge that was 30 years old.
Yeah.
So, 50% were 35 years of age or younger at the time of their first abuse. Almost 70% were ordained before 1970. I don't really know how to speak to that. That's a staggering statistic, but I don't know what it means. I can't speak to that being a generational issue, but it's a very strange thing that far more than half of the abusive priests were ordained before 1970. And then the final one is fewer than 7%, and this Olivia is what I wanted to bring up to you. Fewer than 7% of the priests who abused children were reported to have themselves been victims of physical, sexual, or emotional abuse as children. 19% had alcohol or substance abuse problems, and 9% were reported to have been using drugs or alcohol during the instances of abuse. Tiny percent. And I'll be willing to say that as members of the Catholic Church, that they wouldn't really be willing to disclose those things even if they were true. So I'm willing to round that up to even 15, just for posterity's sake. Right. You know, like it's very possible that a lot of the priests just didn't want people to know that they had been victims of physical abuse or sexual abuse. But even so, 7% is startling in how small it is. Because I would have guessed that they would have also been victims of abuse. You know, that's the statistic thing in just lay people. Right. That it carries, but in this case, it's just a bunch of really evil people, I guess.
So I looked up like the stats for it. So in 1998, it was estimated that 30% of sex offenders were sexually abused. And then in 2001, it was estimated that 67% of sex offenders were abused.
And this is just like all sex offenders ever.
Yeah,
right?
This isn't the church. Yeah. This is sex offenders in general, right?
For sure.
So
you might be large chunk
with the not willing to admit it kind of thing, because
it's possible.
I don't think a priest
and
would
obviously there's no way for us to know, and that's purely speculation. So, but
it's hard to say.
That's a crazy disparity. 7% and then 60 whatever you said.
Yeah, it
crazy.
Says note on the second one that it went from 67 to 27 when they were given a polygraph, but I mean, polygraphs are pretty garbage. I would say 30 is a safe percent.
Yeah, still a crazy disparity. You know, that's
weird,
insane. But that's the last of the John Jay report, and it's just a whole lot of bad. And I think that can segue us into what I think is the worst part, but definitely the most specific part of today's podcast. And that is, of course, the Pennsylvania grand jury, which just broke about a month ago.
Yeah.
And even then, more information has come out since the news broke. And this is what legal experts refer to as the most extensive investigation into sexual abuse of children in the Catholic Church in the history of the United States.
Great.
And this is just one state. It wasn't like they were going into every single Catholic church in America. This is just Pennsylvania. And so the Attorney General investigated 6 of Pennsylvania's 8 dioceses, and that was in Allentown, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, Greenburgh, Erie, and Scranton. Hey! The office has failed me. How dare you, Scranton, Pennsylvania? These are the jokes. The Archdiocese of Pennsylvania was not included in the investigation for the sole reason that it had already been investigated twice in the last 15 years. Like, just imagine for a second having a reputation that bad that, like, they're specifically investigating all the ministries in the state of Pennsylvania, but not you, because we already know that you're a piece of shit.
Yeah, that ministry has already been through the ringer. We don't even have to touch that. We know exactly what's happening.
I thought that the Archdiocese had declined participating because it happened, but they just like,
overlooked
holy
it.
shit, they just went, Yeah, you know what? We got enough on that. We don't need to worry about that.
We know.
A similar
We
thing
know.
happened. Yeah, a similar thing happened to the 8th one that they didn't do, because they had been investigated once by the Attorney General's predecessor, so they already knew.
Damn.
And had uncovered just damning evidence at the time, so they just overlooked
that's good.
those two.
That means 2 out of the 8 are done. So that's 1/4.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you say done. I mean, it doesn't mean that they're getting
Well, it's the abuse
shut
didn't
down.
stop, but the research was there, so
Sure.
you know.
So yeah, this is, of course, was the first time ever that the entire state of Pennsylvania would know the detailed inner workings of the underbelly of the Catholic Church. No one had ever gone this deep in any one state, I think, ever. The grand jury report covers an 18-month investigation into the church's activities from 1950 until the present day, and named over 300 priests, named them, who were found to have unequivocally sexually assaulted at least 1,000 named children. Yeah. Though the report states that, like Olivia said earlier, that there were likely thousands more that they couldn't get to, you know? A quote from the grand jury report reads, quote, "Priests were raping little boys and girls, and the men of God who were responsible for them not only did nothing, they hid it all for decades."
Oh, they give me chills.
Right? It's just, and you can, if you read it, I read some of the pages because it's an insanely long report, but the judge in the report, the Attorney General, was just seething throughout. You can read it and feel it, that there's just this righteous rage throughout the entire report.
Good.
Yeah, because it's horrifying. So the grand jury report is insane, and they did so much work on this. The jury poured over more than 2 million pages of documents, and the report itself is over 1,400 pages long.
Wow.
Yeah, the victim testimonies, of course, are all incredibly graphic and disturbing, and I am going to read a few of the details to you, but I want to warn anybody listening that this does get extremely triggering, especially for those who are survivors of childhood sexual abuse. So if you've been thinking about skipping ahead, definitely do that now. It should be, I don't know, maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes, depending on how much commentary there is.
To be safe.
Okay, so just getting right into it then. One boy was found to have been raped from the ages of 13 to 15, and the priest bore down so hard on his back that it caused severe spinal injuries, for which he became addicted to prescription pain medication. He later died of an overdose.
Oh my god.
Yeah, that I think was one of the worst ones. One victim in Pittsburgh was forced to pose naked as Christ on a cross, while priests photographed him with a Polaroid.
What the
Priests
fuck?
or priest?
Priests.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, that's plural, my dude. Priests, plural, gave the boy and others gold cross necklaces to mark them as being, quote, groomed for abuse.
Oh.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I think that one just, that travels right into just sadism.
Oh my
Like,
God,
that's
disgusting.
Yeah, it's insane. Another recounted being raped by a priest during his time at Catholic school, and then found that the same priest sexually abused one of his friends, who ended up killing himself in 2009. Some of the survivors who spoke called the experience cathartic, while others, it just ended up reigniting old trauma. One victim, I remember reading, returned to her home after giving her testimony and attempted to commit suicide. And said from her hospital bed when they stabilized her that she wanted the findings of the report to be made public so that no one had to suffer the way that she did.
Oh my God, that's awful.
Yeah, she survived, and like when they stabilized her, she's okay now. But she's an adult, and this happened when she was a child.
Right.
And it's just, it doesn't get better, you know? And that sort of wraps up the ones that I wanted. I didn't want to go too far into it with the specifics, but I think it's important to name some of them.
Yeah.
Just because these people's lives were ruined by people in power.
Right.
It's rough. And as with most of these cases, just across the nation and around the world, the accusations made by the victims were generally too old to result in a criminal trial or prosecution. And the Attorney General blamed the church's covering up of the evidence and exploitation of, quote, weak laws in Pennsylvania for his inability to prosecute more priests, and went so far as to say, and I quote, "We all wish more charges could be filed, but that his hands were tied due to the statute of limitations." To give some perspective on that, CSA victims are able to file civil suits until they're 30 and criminal cases until they're 50. In this report, in this grand jury, the oldest survivor who testified was 83 years old.
Oh, no.
Isn't that fucking wild? 83 years old.
And he carried that with him his whole goddamn fucking life. Jesus.
Yeah, and never reported it just because of the way that the church manipulated him. That's a whole life. Yeah. Sorry, guys. There are really no funnies on this one.
There's no way you can do bits or make jokes.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you ever end up watching The Keepers?
For everybody listening at home, The Keepers goes into a little bit of this. It's about a nun, I believe, who prodded a little too close into the Catholic Church's abuse of kids, and she ended up getting murdered. It's a series on Netflix, and I honestly can't recommend it enough, but I only watched 2 episodes because I could not continue.
Yeah, it's really rough, but like there was one. So essentially, if you're gonna watch it too, I feel like episodes 2 through 5 are the really, really, really graphic ones, and then I would say the last ones are actually sadder because that's all the legal proceedings. And one of the ladies talks about how she had flashbacks when she was in her 40s. Essentially, she had compartmentalized it and completely blocked it out until she was in her 40s. Until like one day she was contacted by somebody she went to Catholic school with, and her friend was like, "Oh, like, do you remember that one nun that we like really liked, who got like murdered or something?" And she said it like, I don't know, it resonated something in her, and she couldn't stop thinking about it, and she couldn't figure out why she couldn't stop thinking about it, and she essentially unlocked this memory that she had completely blocked out. And I'm sorry I'm ruining it a bit, so my mea culpa. She blocked out this memory where the priest who had molested everyone killed her, and took that girl to see the dead body to show her what will happen to her if she tells anyone.
Holy shit.
And she doesn't realize that until she's in her 40s. And so she goes to the Catholic Church and she tells them, "Hey, this is something that happened to me. I never reported it. Like, I honestly didn't realize it. I want you to know so something can be done about it." And they interviewed her. They had her do like a signed document of like her experiences, and they said they would do something about it. And she had essentially signed her right to report it, because they said, we're going to deal with this internally, don't tell anyone. And so eventually it went to the Supreme Court. It was a big, big trial where basically a bunch of the girls from that specific high school all reported abuse from the same 2 or 3 priests.
Holy shit.
It's a really good docuseries, and it's just so fucked up. Especially that part, the part where he literally said, like, look at her in the eyes. This is what's going to happen to you if you ever report this.
God. I mean, and can you blame her,
really
her
fucked,
subconscious?
Dude, really fucked.
Like, your brain's whole job is to keep you from being too traumatized to function. And, like...
Yeah, and that was the thing. A lot of these girls,
you.
too, they talked about, like, most of them didn't even remember it until they were in their 40s. Like, they had actually just, like, shut it off in their brain and lived their entire life. So I'm sure that trial where they're giving their confessions, I'm sure for a lot of them, they legitimately had not thought about it in, like, 30 years.
Right.
Oh, man.
Which is, like, even worse. Like, it's not something you think about every day and you process every day. It's like, oh my God, I haven't remembered for the past 30 years of my life that this horrific thing happened to me, and now that I'm an adult, I'm now dealing with the emotional repercussions of that. Because she had a completely fine relationship with her husband, like, kids, no issues, never thought about it, never went to therapy for it because she didn't remember it, and then, boom, it all hits her like a ton of bricks.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and they talk about it in the documentary. Essentially, this one priest was systematically taking these high school girls. This is, like, really graphic, by the way, so just definitely skip this next minute that I'm about to talk about. Would essentially systematically take these high school girls and essentially, like, prostitute them out to the cops. So the cops were having sex with the high school girls.
Oh,
and,
so they couldn't report it.
And then other members of the, like, the politicians, not politicians, like, generally, but, like, people who were in charge of legislation and laws in that town were having sex with the girls. So everybody was kind of looped in, where if this guy went down, everyone would go down. Like, the entire police precinct was
so the
involved
girls
in this
had no
sex
recourse
ring,
at all.
right?
Yeah.
Insane. Yeah.
That's crazy.
So, yeah. Definitely watch that docuseries. I honestly, I've summarized a lot, but it's much worse to hear it firsthand from the girls.
Watch it or don't, you know.
Oh, man. There was
do
one...
what is best for you.
Yeah, there was one segment or something where a girl, basically what the priest would do is he'd call them over the speaker and be like, blank, you're being summoned to, like,
I remember
like,
this.
the office.
yeah.
And all of the girls in the class would look at whoever was getting up and give them sad eyes. Like, not a single person would not look at them with empathy. Because
they all knew exactly what was happening.
Yeah.
God.
Or, you guys, if you really want to watch a good movie, Rugrats Go to Paris is great.
Just to lighten the goddamn mood.
Fucking just have something decent in this goddamn world. You can see Chucky try to explore Paris for Rap Talk.
Yeah, I'm getting a facial after this. I need a goddamn massage. I'm gonna take a Xanax.
Jesus Christ.
I really like Winnie the Pooh. That's a good one.
Brave Little Toaster. Anyone?
Yeah, the Brave Little Toaster. I cry every time I watch the Brave Little Toaster.
Such a good movie.
Real quick, I watched The Labyrinth with David Bowie.
Shit! That movie is the bomb.fucking-com.
If you haven't seen that movie, I know this is totally off topic, but it's fine because it's just been so dark. But if you haven't seen that movie, I rewatched it again the other day because it's one of my favorite movies from my childhood. It's basically Jim Henson's puppetry and all of his puppet works mixed with David Bowie as a goblin king, and all his goblins are all puppets, right?
And the tightest goddamn pants on the planet.
You can see everything David Bowie has to offer
right now.
But yeah, it's an 80s movie that David Bowie writes all the music for, and it's just him and Jim Henson's puppets. And this woman has to go through this labyrinth to find her baby brother, who the Goblin King has stolen. Anyway, magical movie. I love it a lot. And I literally,
so great.
yeah. So that's a good one if you guys want to watch that one to get your mind off of whatever the fuck
Be
this
prepared
is.
for a lot of glitter and a whole lot of 80s cheese. Super good. Oh, I love it.
Anyway, Brooke, you have more statistics?
So I don't actually. We're coming up right on the conclusion of this, and then we can sort of go into commentary, which is great because we're right at I think about an hour. So the grand jury report can basically be summed up with getting the stories out there, investigating the criminal activity of these dioceses, exposing them, but they really couldn't do anything about it. There were a few cases where they were able to formally charge and prosecute certain priests because the statute of limitations hadn't run out, but in most of the cases, it was just for exposure's sake.
Right.
Pennsylvania as a state has had more investigations into the sexual abuse of minors by the Catholic Church than any other state in the U.S. To this day, there's never been a nationwide investigation or report. And can you imagine if they did in the U.S. what they did in Pennsylvania?
Man,
that would
those
be...
stats would bum me the fuck out.
But they need to.
Yeah,
I
they need to be
assume,
out.
though, Pennsylvania is probably going to be one of the highest because of the Catholic population.
We'll never,
yeah.
but like that's the thing is, it's like we'll never know, right? Because we can only
Yeah.
speculate so much that like there
Sure.
needs to be a full report done,
Yeah.
nationally. Like this is so detrimental. Like something needs to be done about it. Like there's no way.
Well, and as it stands right now, movement towards change in both the Vatican and in individual dioceses runs at just a glacial pace.
Yeah.
You know, and even though the grand jury has formally called for new laws that allow for a widened window to report childhood sexual abuse,
Yes.
no real concrete steps have been taken yet to prevent this from happening again. And granted,
Right.
like, the report just went public.
Okay.
So we'll see.
I guess
Yeah, also, too, I was going to say in The Keepers, one of the guys who was in charge of representing the victims who, like, basically had the flashbacks and fully remembered it, he said in a lot of sexual abuse cases, it's completely blocked out until, like, an average age of, like, late 40s, early 50s. Like,
Yeah.
most people will block it out. And he said, so if we create a statute of limitations where you need to remember it decades before statistically you're going to remember it, we're kind of setting them up to fail.
Yeah, of course.
So.
The system doesn't work. Like,
Right.
it clearly just doesn't work. And, you know, the cover-up of sexual abuse continues on both a small and widespread scale today. It's still happening. It would be naive of me to say, well,
And
since it's
it's all
exposed,
done
it's just
now.
not happening, you know? I guess we can just wash our hands of this. No, there are thousands of cases that can't be brought to fruition because the church, because of the church's direct action against the legal process. Their destruction of documents, their relabeling of literal rape into, and I quote, horseplay, roughhousing, or inappropriate conduct.
Fuck.
You know, as it stands today, with specifically the grand jury case and a lot of the cases across the nation, the only thing that can be done to bring justice to these monsters is to publish their names and actions in this grand jury report and in any cases that pop up hereafter. And even then, there is currently a legal battle going on right now where the priests that were figured in the grand jury report are trying to get their names redacted from it.
no,
Even now,
no.
after everything that we know, they might still have the right to be shielded from the consequences of their actions.
Absolutely not.
That alone, they escaped due process, and they still might be able to live in anonymity. That keeps me up at night. The system is fucking broken, my friends.
I feel like personally what should be done is like that list should be posted on every like fucking site in a minute, like
Right,
like
just
you're on
anonymously
Netflix
post it.
and you
Vigilante
just scroll
sites.
down. Yeah, like fuck. There should just be like lists, of just these people's names. Like they deserve
Yeah.
so much. Oh my god, they
deserve jail time for the rest of their lives, but we're
Oh,
past that
absolutely.
apparently.
Absolutely.
And so the only thing that can be done is to expose them. And the fact that due process gives them the right to potentially have their names redacted, it's baffling to me. And I don't want it to sound like I'm trampling on due process, because clearly that's something that I think should apply to these people. But I just don't understand how redacting their names helps anyone but them. And I sincerely hope that when the legal proceedings kind of come to a close, that they decide in favor of the victims. Because
Right.
it would just blow my mind if they ruled that it was okay for their names to be redacted.
I guess we're just gonna have to wait and see.
Well, that keeps me
Yeah,
up
this
at
is all
night.
really recent. Yeah, sure
Yeah.
does. But yeah, this is super recent, and like even now, stuff is coming out every day with like new information. So it literally is just a waiting game to see what happens in response to this.
Yeah.
And like some of the bishops at the churches in Pennsylvania have made statements, and often they are apologetic while also slightly defensive, which is to be expected, I think. But so far, nothing about change, really.
Great.
Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, that's the close of our cover-up. Hang on one second. Shit.
Cats.
Yes, cats. Can you hear them?
Not
I'm
really.
afraid that they've been... Because they got a hold of a piece of paper and they were trying to tear it up. And I'm afraid that's going to come up on the recording.
Morons.
They are that. Anyway, and that sort of brings us to a close on cover-ups, which somehow ended up being the most depressing one we've done yet. Who saw that coming? I didn't.
I really thought cults would be awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one was kind of fun.
That was fucking child's play.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Well, I guess the good news is we didn't have a lot of laughs during this one, but
Yeah, sorry.
for our mini-sode, it's going to be way more lighthearted and fun and just frustrating, but in a that's okay way.
Also,
Yeah, this
do
is
we
not
want to
shit that
talk
is gonna
about
kill
our
anyone.
feelings and perspectives and how we've changed as people after this next series? Yes, one idea?
Sure.
I'll
It's
go
becoming
first.
standard practice. Yay.
Boys. This was really, truly, like... For the listeners out there, like, y'all get an hour and a half once a week, right? Researching these is like a 2-week process of, like, just little bits. Like, we can only do so much at once, right? Like, I feel like this, I don't know if this is just me, but sometimes I will have been able to research maybe 3 hours in one day and just go, I cannot read more about this.
Right.
I won't lie to you. For a lot of this, it was just me reading documents and not writing a damn thing because I didn't know how to tackle it.
Yeah.
It was just
There's so much.
Yeah, and I have a feeling that was the same for you too because
Yeah.
both of your topics were just so widespread.
Yeah, and it's like you'll be reading something and then you're like, oh fuck, I just discovered a new thing. How do I add that to this? It's so important. This was a really challenging series. Just, I feel like all of us had to read a lot of in-depth court stuff, summaries, learn a lot of new terminology. It was a hard one because with the cults and with the groupthink, you could argue, how much can I hate someone for being a product of their environment? How much can I hate someone for making a decision that they truly believe is right, even if I think it's really fucked up? This one, people are objectively making terrible, fucked up decisions at the expense of others for their own selfishness. It is very, 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 very hard for me to give someone the benefit of the doubt for relying on the low, life expectancy of a human being to sell cigarettes or to hope that information on the safety of their players doesn't get released so they can continue to sell tickets, or to not report something to save somebody like in their parish at the expense of potentially harming thousands of people. Like, I cannot in any shape, way, or form justify you doing that. And I'm kind of in Brooke's camp of like, I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. You have to die. Like, how could you, like, just capitalize on the expense of hurting others to save your ass? Like, I just can't.
And often not even just save your ass, but to gain something that you don't need.
It's just, and then, and I tried to do my best to find some explanation of somebody who said, like, this is why we did it, this is why we covered it up, right? And I found nothing. Like, at least with the cigarette companies, anybody who disagreed with what they were doing, all they really could do was leave the company and then publicly make statements that it was fucked up. But, like, what else could you do as an advertising firm? Like, you can make interviews and go, well, I disagree with that. That's why we don't work with them. Like, that's all you can do. Like, even if you were, you know, a member of the church, like, I don't know, that example I gave where they literally murdered a woman in cold blood because she was going to, like, you know, release information on them. Like, I don't know, man. Like, how could you do it? Ugh.
And again, like you said, it's systemic. So there is a certain element of it where it's like, I hate to use the Nazi example, but it's like, if I don't do it, someone else will.
Yeah.
That
Right,
mentality.
right.
So it's like, I may as well save my own ass because this is my little microcosm.
Yeah.
But like, I there's a lot of this where, and I have a similar stance as I did with the Stanford prison experiment, where like no one asked, like, let me start that over. I'm specifically referring to the bit where kids had to pose as Christ on the cross and wear gold chains that marked them as groomed. That is so far beyond just sexual assault. That's psychological torture.
Yeah.
And I don't understand how someone who isn't just a straight up monster can ever think of that. Never mind do it to someone.
Right.
Yeah.
That's just evil. Like, I can't qualify that as anything else. That's just evil.
Yeah.
I guess what I learned is, I mean, yes, this is the hardest for me to do research on, because my first one was the Stanford prison experiment, which was just like a fucked up experiment that lasted for the span of a week, right?
And also
My
it's
second-
like 20 people tops. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, like, the second one was a fucked up cult that lasted for a short amount of time, right? Which, again, affected a lot of people's lives, awful, horrible. And then this one is more along the lines of, like, this is just people off of selfish need, greed, whatever the fuck their motivations are, abusing others at a mass level because they can. And
Yeah.
that's all that is for me. It's just that if given the right person and the right situation, people will abuse their power. And there's a lot of fucked up shit going on, and there's no resolution. Because you think about it, it's like tobacco companies are doing very well. The NFL doing very well. Catholic Church, doesn't have a great reputation
Business is
right now.
fucking
They have a
booming.
shitload of money.
But they have a shitload of money, and they're going to continue to be a thing. It's not like tomorrow it's going to be like, well, based on everything that's been going on with Catholicism,
It's canceled. We're canceling
yeah,
it.
like there's no way that's going to happen. So I think it's the whole thing for me was for like Stanford prison experiment was like, well, it's over, it's done. This is what we know about it now, and we can make progress forward. For cults, it's like, well, yeah, it's over and it's done, and this is what we know now. We can make progress forward. And it's like this one. It's like, well, it's still
What can we do?
happening. And there's not a feasible solution to this. Even if you were to be one of the people that recognizes the problem and has power, it's like, well, are we just going to tell people that they can't watch American football or adhere to their religion? There's probably a dude out there somewhere who listens to our podcast who smokes cigarettes, like a pack of cigs
He's a
a day,
Catholic and he loves NFL.
is a big Steelers fan,
Oh boy.
has a picture of Jesus up hanging on his wall somewhere in Illinois, and it's just like,
Tony, I'm so sorry.
Tony, we just want to say that, we didn't mean to call you out.
Personally. It's
But
just that
hey,
everything
man,
you
for a
like
good
is
time,
garbage.
to forget his
Yeah.
life, just listen to a fun podcast, and here we are shitting on everything he loves.
Tony loves
Your
and
whole
holds
life
near and
is
dear to his
garbage.
heart.
This
Tony.
almost inadvertently became like a fucking roast of just American
Of just-
culture, like
Yeah.
cigarettes, sports, and religion. All of
Yeah.
it. All of it sucks. Apparently.
Oh, God.
I think, because I can't even, I don't know what the takeaway from this is. I really don't.
Yeah, it's so hard to boil it down.
Well, yeah. What about you, Brooke? How have you changed and grown as a person?
Honestly, like, and this isn't news, so I guess I can't say that I learned this, but, like, if you have money, man, you can do whatever the fuck you want. Like, that's pretty much the common thread.
Yeah.
With all three of these is, like, the cigarette companies, they are now, like, legally allowed to monopolize this market.
Yep.
And, like, the NFL obviously is just flush with cash, and then the Catholic Church, of course, is a multi-billion-dollar business, obviously. And like, if you have that money, you can make anything happen the way you want. For years, for decades, you can just make it like it never happened.
Well, and you also look at it too, and it's like, I remember I read somewhere online that someone was driving in their car with like one of their rich friends, and the rich friend like pulled over and parked in a space that they weren't allowed to park in. And it was like, if you parked there for a certain amount of time, like you could get a fine of up to this amount of money. And so when that person commented and say, hey, we shouldn't park here because we can get a fine, the rich person said, well, it's just a penalty. It's a fine. I'll pay it. So then from that point on, the person made a really good point of saying, like, if you are rich enough, it's just tickets that you have to pay for doing wrong things.
Yeah, you can
it's
do
just,
whatever you want.
It's just buying it. Yeah,
exactly.
It's a transaction. It's crazy. And I have actually read the post that you are talking about.
I have too. Love
and there's a second part of it. I don't know if you guys have heard it. In the UK, there are certain zones where if you park there, they will tow your car and crush it for that exact reason.
Oh, love it.
My spiteful heart just loves that.
It's
beautiful.
Yeah, no, U.S. is very much of a country. If you have enough money, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, and that's just like, I'm so sorry that there's no goof here. It's just depressing.
Yeah.
Living in America.
Oh God, like, I'd
Jesus.
love to have a takeaway that makes me like a better, stronger person or whatever. But really, like, my only takeaway with this is that like, there's really nothing you can do except speak up where you see an opening. And even then, it might not change anything. And I guess at the end of the day, I want to make it clear that we, like the royal you, I guess, are still responsible for speaking up anyway. Yeah. Because it's really, really easy to get like really demoralized when you hear, well, the Catholic Church can do whatever they want because they have billions of dollars, because that's true. And it's so easy to hear that and just be like, well, why fucking bother? Because you have to, like, there's no other option. If you see it and you have the ability to speak up, you have no choice.
Right. And I think you need to do something about it. Well, because I also was like thinking like, if you don't speak up, then you're contributing to the system. That's all.
Yeah.
So
bystander effect for sure.
Right. It's either you're against it or you're with it. So you got to fight the system, man.
Yeah, I've become very, very squishy in regards to this. Matthew and I have gotten into many an argument over the ethics of investing in sin industries, if you will, which is cigarettes and everything. And I said, by you making money off it, in my eyes, you are directly capitalizing on human death, which is such a fucked up thing to say.
I think you're right, though. Like, Matt and I should never, ever talk about this because, like, he's putting money into the pockets of people who kill people. Like, that's sort of where it starts and stops.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I've made him feel bad, so.
Good. Fuck you, Matthew. I know he's listening. Fuck you.
Hey, Matthew, how's my audio quality sound, bitch?
Yeah, bitch. Oh, boy.
Thanks for the memes, bud.
And if we could...
I'm sorry. We'll just cut this out. Or maybe we won't, because Olivia likes the funnies, I guess.
I do.
You guys have been really, really good about leaving reviews. We've actually, I don't remember if we talked about this last time, but we are now a 5-star podcast on iTunes. Oh my God. But yeah, we are still in the preliminary stages of this podcast, so if you could leave a review, just letting us know what you think. Anything that you'd like to see, that would be so appreciated, especially on iTunes, because that's what helps us get promoted on their algorithm.
Yes,
you can also follow...
we have 8 reviews on iTunes.
Thank you.
Shout out to everybody that has. My boss has. Love you, Darnell. You're the best.
Yes.
Everybody thank Darnell.
You so much.
Thank you, Darnell.
Very sweet pot. It was very
good
cute.
man.
Thank you, Milan.
Oh,
Thank
and
you.
Milan. Love
Thank you,
Milan.
my boyfriend Christian.
And my dad.
And your dad, I saw that one. That was nice.
Yeah.
You can also follow the podcast on at TTKMeUp on Twitter and Instagram, and that's where we're going to post updates about the show and little sneaky peekies of the next episodes. Yeah, that'll be fun times. And then in the bios of those accounts, you can find our personal accounts as well for both Twitter and Instagram.
Yes.
You can follow us there and see the bullshit that we post. It's going to be fun times.
Yes.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Yes, we do. And just to leave it on a light note, do we say what our Minnesota's about? Because I feel like it'll be fun. It'll be a nice...
Oh, yeah. Let's give the people what they want.
It's going to be customer service horror stories, which I'm sure will be so great for everyone else to hear. But
pure
for
catharsis.
me, God, these are going to open some old wounds.
Olivia's been working at the Sawdust Festival this summer. For anybody who's not in California, you have no idea what that means, but it's like an arts and crafts festival. And she's been working food service, and I think I get a text every day about just some bullshit that she
Because I love working
experiences.
there. Love my manager. He's listening. Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Love my coworkers. Love the environment. Love making coffee. But sometimes, you just get one or two customers that make you wonder whether it's worth it to have a job at all anymore. And, I have so many questions about the survivability of the human race. And
Oh boy.
we'll talk about that next week. It'll be real
Hell yeah.
fun. And to my knowledge, we will have new mics by our next mini-sode.
Yeah.
Yes, we will.
We're gonna be professional. It's so cute.
And please don't comment that you can't hear the difference because that'll hurt our feelings.
It will
Thank
hurt
you.
my heart.
Even if you can't, even if the audio quality is worse, just be like, oh my god, you guys sound so good.
I'm begging you. My heart can't handle it.
God,
Right,
it's
that's
gonna
money
really
for
break
me.
my heart if because we record this on our iPhones. If an iPhone speaker is better than the it was like $60 mic that I just bought.
Yeah.
Bruh. So,
Thank you so much, everybody.
It's been real. Thank you
Sure
for
has.
coming in. Deuces.
All right.
See ya.
Bye.